The best part about Heroscape is the dwarf. You know, nobody's gonna get this reference in 2024, are they?
Cool.
I still remember my first time seeing an ad for Hasbro's Heroscape. I had to have been about 10 years old at the time, and I was watching Cartoon Network when suddenly I bore witness to the greatest sight that my young eyes had ever beheld. It was a commercial, but frankly it was better described as an animated short film. The pitch was simple. Warriors from throughout time and space were being collected by some otherworldly force to do battle on a distant planet. An American soldier from World War II fighting shoulder to shoulder with a brave samurai, and Morpheus with the serial numbers filed off, all squaring off against killer robots, massive dragons, and raptor-mounted aliens. It was easily the coolest thing I had ever seen, and then the animation cut to reveal that this was in fact a pitch for a new board game, stuffed to the gills with imaginatively designed, fully painted miniatures, and a modular hexagon-based battlefield that could be built into any configuration that you could imagine. This was Heroscape, and to this day I maintain that it is the greatest children's product ever designed and released by an American company. It is also a product that I never really got to experience for myself. Yeah, around the time that Heroscape came out, I was a small child who wasn't really collecting a regular allowance, and because this was during the GameCube era, I really had to pick my battles on how I used what little purchasing power that I did have. Looking back now, though, and realizing recently that the base set wasn't actually as expensive as I remember it seeming, maybe I should have just done myself a favor and asked my parents to get it for me as a Christmas present one year instead of that copy of Mega Man Network Transmission that I wanted so badly for some reason.
This game blows!
But hey, hindsight's 2020, and if we could all go back and redo the mistakes of our childhood, then we'd probably have a lot less interesting stories to tell. I'm getting away from myself, though. Back on track, Heroscape. Though I never really got the chance to play it in my younger years, I had always carried a small flame for it as I went throughout my life. I had never really even heard the term wargame until I went to college, so my imagination in my younger years would run wild thinking of what this wondrous super game actually was like to experience. However, by the time that I had actually begun to make my own money, the game was long since out of print, and I had resolved myself to the fact that I would likely never get to know that for myself. This was, of course, before I had the revelation that every working adult eventually has, where we say to ourselves, wait, isn't somebody on eBay just probably selling that toy that I always wanted but never got? A dangerous line of thinking, to be sure, because this is how I ended up buying Zatch Bell TCG starter decks in the 2020s.
It's actually far worse than that because I said decks, but I only ever bought the one, which means I couldn't play with it even if I wanted to.
As it turns out, though, I never really had the chance to do the same for Heroscape, because in 2022, the unthinkable happened. An announcement that Heroscape was rising from the dead. Of course, this meant that Heroscape wasn't the only thing rising.
If you know what I mean, and I think you do.
And now to cut a long and stupid story extremely short, let's just say that I shouldn't have bothered rising because it led to some premature celebration. Hasbro, being the marketing geniuses that they are, decided that obviously the best way to bring back a beloved legacy game whose appeal lied in its low barrier to entry was to do a crowdfunding campaign on Hasbro Pulse, their own in-house version of Kickstarter with blackjack and hookers. The amount of times that Hasbro has announced something cool and then shoved it onto Hasbro Pulse because it's too expensive for the common man, like, I really wanted that damn League of Legends Jinx Nerf gun, and again, way too expensive, and Hasbro Pulse. And, as if all of this wasn't enough of a clown fiesta already, they decided to invite Art along, who did that thing he did in Terrifier 2, if you know you know, and decided that there would only be a single support tier with a buy-in cost of $250.
I dress myself.
So just to recap, the revival of one of the most bang-for-your-buck wargames ever created with an audience of children would now cost you $250 and would only be made if they reached their funding goal of $2 million. Sorry about that, but we really had to emphasize exactly how boneheaded of a decision that is. Needless to say, the campaign failed, and if you want to know more, then I will leave a link in the description to an excellent write-up from the Hobby Drama subreddit. But yes, Hasbro managed to raise my hopes and dash them quite expertly, and I was left once again convinced that Heroscape was just a burning memory. That is, until the tail end of August, when a post was made in my LGS's Discord announcing that Heroscape was back and in stock.
I have got to do something about that air conditioner suction.
I could not believe it. when I went in for our usual Wednesday meetup at the LGS, there it was. A beautiful display of miniatures and hex terrain, just like the ones I saw on TV as a child. I checked the shelf and saw a giant starter box, as well as a new expansion and a bonus figure of the same soldier from the original commercial, rocking a brand new design and being offered completely for free to anybody who bought the master set. And beyond even that, the master set that was originally on Hasbro Pulse for $250 was now being offered for a scant $125. There were, of course, compromises that had to be made, namely that the figures came completely unpainted now, but again, at $125, it was just within the range of affordability that I told myself that I would hold off now because I'm saving money, but probably buy it down the line.
I need it!
I lasted about 2 hours. Yes, my dear viewers, I am incredibly weak and left the shop that day with a copy of the Master Set and a Sergeant Drake Alexander figure of my very own. And finally holding in my hands a version of the game that had eluded my grasp for so long felt almost like completing a quest. A quest that had been going for about 20 years or so now. I won't lie, I was giddy, and I already knew as soon as I got home that I was going to be making a video about this one way or the other. Since then, I have gotten in a number of games, and I want to share my thoughts with players new, old, and perspective on how it feels. In the time between the original game and this new Age of Annihilation box, I have actually played a couple of miniature wargames myself, and as such, I'm approaching this from the perspective of someone with what I would call a median experience level. With that in mind, how would I describe the experience? Well, viewers who saw my last video on Dungeon Dice Monsters will recall that one of the things I really lament about its absence is that it served as baby's first wargame that anybody could pick up and get playing out of the box in under an hour. And if I were to refer to Dungeon Dice Monsters as a kindergarten level wargame, then I would call Heroscape a first grade level wargame. Now before you say anything, this is not dismissing what Heroscape is. Quite the opposite, in fact, because I think Heroscape is as close to an entry level wargame as is available on the market today, which is a fantastic thing. One of the things that I found to be really important about Dungeon Dice Monsters as an entry-level wargame was that the objective was always the same. Players would always be racing to be the first to land 3 hits on their opponent's monster lord. This static goal meant that the game was easy to teach to new players. Gamers who are more familiar with standard war and skirmish games, however, will know that typically when you sit down to play one of those games, you select a mission from a sourcebook and agree on a certain points values worth of figures that will comprise your army. From there, games are typically decided by the degree to which each player can complete the objective for that mission. And Heroscape is a lot more like a traditional wargame in this sense, with the included sourcebook providing a list of missions with step-by-step map building instructions, preset point limits, and special rules and objectives. However, this is where you really begin to see the steps that Heroscape takes in onboarding new players. Each of the cards associated with the playable figures is double-sided, with one side being a simple list of stats, and the other adding wound counts, special abilities, and point values. Each of the map configurations in the included sourcebook has associated missions for both master and basic versions of the game. The basic game is exactly what it sounds like, a simplified version of Heroscape that you can use to get new players familiar with how wargames work without them getting bogged down in all the details. Typically, the goal of these basic missions are to just destroy all of your opponent's figures before they can destroy all of yours, and the players are provided with pre-made army lists and deployment spaces. Once a player manages to get a couple of basic games under their belt, or honestly even one, it's very easy to jump right into a master game from there. The big differences between the basic and master game are twofold. First, in a master game, players will use the side of their character cards that has the expanded rules, and second, instead of being given a preset army list, players are expected to construct their own lists with the point values provided in the mission. Something that gives Heroscape a distinct twist compared to more traditional wargames like those from Games Workshop, though, is the included rules for drafting armies. Much like a booster draft in a trading card game, these missions are going to have players picking units one at a time from all of those available to them, and even giving the option for strategic counter-picking to stop synergies that the opponent might be building. This is also where that $125 price tag comes into play. Unlike Warhammer or other traditional wargames, Heroscape is designed to be played completely out of the box, meaning that it provides enough figures for at least 2 players to be able to draft full armies only using a single starter set. Of course, if you don't like the idea of drafting armies, nobody says you have to. It's just as easy to agree with your opponent on what figures each of you want to take, or to even buy multiple sets if you both like to use the same characters. The appeal of Heroscape was always in its customizable gameplay. It's much less a board game and more an avenue for creativity. Once both players have built their armies, the game begins, with both players racing to complete their objectives. In the gameplay you're seeing now, our objective was actually to get these little maroon glyph tiles and take them back to the white altar tiles on the mountains in order to appease the ghosts that were trying to kill our armies. Which would have been a really cool scenario if we hadn't basically put each other through the meat grinder right as the game began, thanks to some pretty brutal dice rolls.
Now I can attack an adjacent figure to my freak.
Not good.
Increased by 2 after attacking once.
Ooh, that's less good. Which we were already not good. It's okay, you're gonna miss all of them. It's okay, I'm gonna save all of them.
Save one.
That's not enough, he's dead.
The turn structure is also really interesting, with each player being given 4 of these turn markers. At the beginning of a round, players will distribute them secretly amongst their figures to lock in the order that they'll be activating. Note that there's only 3 of them, with 1 serving as bluff. What this set value of 3 activations means is that while players do have the option to maximize the points value of their army in order to get the most amount of units on the board as possible, they will have to keep in mind that they might not get to use all of them during the course of a game. There are of course ways to get around this limited activation system, like the absolutely insane combo of Knight Irene and her Frostclaw Paladins, who give her a free activation every time they activate. This is only one of the cool combos we've found so far, and from what I've seen from both the Master Set and the Battle for the Wellspring expansion, the groundwork is being laid for even more crazy tactical synergies. Another thing I found that makes Heroscape work really well as an entry point into the world of wargaming is that there's no codexes, no command points, or any finicky things to keep track of that, while useful in larger games, can feel really overwhelming for new players. The only thing players need to keep track of are the abilities listed on the character cards that we never really had more than 4 of at a time anyways. I still remember my first time playing the original version of Kill Team and constantly flipping through the sourcebook every time me or my opponent made a move in order to ensure that I wasn't missing any chances to use command abilities, and it was exhausting. But in Heroscape, what you see is what you get, for better and for worse. My friend Jet, who helped me playtest the game, said that because of his prior experience with playing Kill Team, he did miss the ability to intervene with specialized faction tactics. But he's also a filthy Tau fan, so his opinion doesn't count anyways. So, in the end, do I think Heroscape's revival is worth buying into? Well, keep in mind that I am incredibly biased because this was my white whale for the longest time. But, in my opinion, yes, that $125 price tag definitely keeps it from being a purchase that requires 0 thought, but in my opinion, what you're getting is worth what you're paying. And in addition to a buttload of interlocking terrain that admittedly needs a little bit of breaking in before it really fits together, you're also getting 20 fully assembled miniatures for that price. And miniature is a deceptive term because Zenithrax alone would easily cost you as much as the entire box if it was being produced by Games Workshop. These things are big and chonky and really freaking cool. I'm sure it's a little disappointing to some that they no longer come pre-painted, instead having a wash thrown onto the bare plastic to show the details, but as somebody who has cut their teeth on Warhammer, I like the idea of being able to customize my figures even if I dread the amount of time it'll take to do so. Much as I love Knight Irene and her paladins in-game, I'm kind of over the Volley Bear thing from League of Legends where you just have the polar bear with the blue effects, so what I'm currently thinking is making them black bears and giving them fire effects. So, I don't know, follow me on Twitter, and if I end up doing that, I'll post it there, because I think it could look really cool. In addition to just the miniatures and terrain, you're also getting multiple scenarios in the main box and the expansion sets that provide a great springboard for players to start designing their own missions, which is just awesome. Just setting up the terrain for this second map configuration we used got my mind racing about all the cool things I'd want to try building. And as if that wasn't enough, Renegade Studios has even set up a newsletter for Heroscape that includes free additional monthly scenarios and map builds, which is a level of support that some game communities could only dream of. So taking that all into consideration, I think Heroscape 2024 is an absolute slam dunk, and frankly, yeah, no, it is just about everything I hoped it would have been back in the day. I am so excited to be a part of this revival from the ground floor, and I cannot wait to see where it goes from here. And hey, I hope I've inspired at least a couple of you to give it a shot for yourselves, because the entire idea behind this channel is wanting to spread the joy of things that I like and get you into things that you might not have otherwise tried. So, Let me know in the comments what you think of the new Heroscape if you've had a chance to try it, or leave me some cool war stories if you're a player who's been here since the original edition. And lastly, before we go our separate ways, could you do me a favor and hit that like button and check out another one of my videos? If you liked this one, then you'd probably also enjoy my last video where I discuss another cool board game from my childhood, Dungeon Dice Monsters. And, as always, just remember that this has been a powerfully pointless video, but I hope you enjoyed it anyways. You know, I get what they were going for when they came up with the tagline, the battle of all time, but man, if modern discourse hasn't completely ruined it thanks to snarky armchair media critics. Shame.